The grand synod of the Ethel Guardian hegemony did not scream. It hummed with the vibrating tension of 1,000 dying worlds. The air inside the obsidian chamber thick with the scent of ozone, burnt circuitry, and the pheromones of high-stress biology emitted by a dozen different species. High Archminister Vrail rested his heavy, chitinous hands upon the polished surface of the consensus table, his compound eyes fracturing the dim light into a mosaic of despair, reflecting the faces of the coalition leaders who sat in silence, waiting for a solution that did not exist. For 300 cycles, the war against the Zartok Dominion had ground the galaxy into a fine powder of debris and sorrow, a stalemate that had consumed fleets, cracked planetary mantles, and extinguished the light of stars for merely tactical advantages, leaving the void between their territories a graveyard of metal and frozen flesh. The holographic projection in the center of the room, a swirling, chaotic sphere of red and blue markers, showed the latest catastrophe in the Antares sector, where the 7th Armada had simply ceased to report in. Swallowed by the singularity weapons the Tsar had finally desperate enough to deploy, tearing the fabric of real space and leaving a scar that would bleed radiation for eons. Vrail felt the weight of history pressing down on his cervical ridges, a crushing gravity that had nothing to do with the spin of the station, and everything to do with the realization that they were the generation who would preside over the final silence. "The logistical reports are unequivocal," intoned Sub-Overseer Kalith, her voice a melodic chiming that usually brought comfort to the synod, but now sounded like a funeral dirge, her avian features drawn tight with exhaustion as she manipulated the data streams with trembling talons. "We have depleted the reactive fuel reserves of the inner systems. Our shipyards are operating at 30% efficiency due to the mineral shortages, and the psychological breaking point of the civilian populace was passed 2 cycles ago. We are not fighting a war anymore, Archminister. We are merely managing the rate of our own extinction." The Tsar are in no better position. Their latest transmissions indicate mass starvation on their colony worlds, yet they continue to fire, continue to advance, driven by the same madness that propels us. It is a suicide pact on a galactic scale. The silence that followed her declaration was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the distant thrum of the station's atmospheric recyclers, struggling to scrub the fear from the air. General Morak, a brutish, cybernetically augmented representative of the Crawl warrior caste, slammed a metallic fist onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the vast, vaulted ceiling of the chamber. "Then we strike at their sons," Morak growled, his voice a grinding of gears and synthetic vocal cords, his single organic eye burning with a fanaticism born of desperation. "We unleash the Starkiller protocols. If we are to die, let us ensure the Tsar do not inherit the ashes. We burn their home system, we shatter their cradle, and perhaps in the chaos we can salvage enough to survive in the drift. Better to be the scavengers of a dead galaxy than the slaves of a Tsar empire." The suggestion hung in the air, a poisonous cloud that tempted them with its finality, a release from the agony of the slow grind. Vrail looked at the faces around the table, the sorrowful Kalith, the calculating insecta diplomat Achesan, the terrified reptilian trade prince Xylas, and saw the horrifying flicker of agreement in their eyes. They were considering it, the unthinkable, the erasure of an entire civilization, billions of innocents, just to end the pain of the conflict. Vrail opened his mandibles to speak, to plead for reason one last time, to remind them of the ancient laws of the progenitors that forbade stellar genocide, but the words died in his throat as the station suddenly shuddered. It was not the violent, jarring impact of a kinetic strike or the scorching heat of a plasma lance. It was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very atoms of the station itself, a frequency so low it was felt in the marrow of their bones rather than heard. The holographic map in the center of the room flickered and died, replaced instantly by a blinding white static that coalesced into a single, terrifying reading. "Sensors!" Vrail barked, the command overriding his fatigue. "Report, have the Tsar breached the perimeter? Is this a singularity detachment?" The sensory officers in the pit below the main podium were scrambling, their appendages flying over consoles that were flashing wildly with data that made no sense, their voices rising in a cacophony of confusion and panic. It is not the Tsar Archminister," the sensory chief stammered, turning his pale, terrified face toward the high dais. "It is not a weapon, it is a displace." Meant a massive displacement. The readings, they are off the scale. Something has entered the system, something impossibly large. The main view screen, a massive pane of transparasteel that looked out into the void, suddenly darkened, the starlight blotted out not by a shadow but by a presence. From the darkness of the void, where there should have been only empty space and the distant glitter of the galactic core, a shape began to emerge, pushing through the fabric of reality like a leviathan breaching the surface of a dark ocean. It was sleek, angular, and terrifying in its geometric perfection, a hull of matte gray shifting into obsidian, devoid of the jagged protrusions and aggressive weapon ports that characterized the warships of the hegemony and the Tsar. It was a monolith, a silent cathedral of metal and energy that dwarfed the station, dwarfed the heavy cruisers flanking it, dwarfed even the dreadnoughts that were the pride of the fleet. "The scale," whispered Calith, her eyes wide, reflecting the monstrosity on the screen. "There are no engine signatures, no exhaust plumes, no shield harmonics. It is just there. How can something that size exist without collapsing under its own gravity?" The sensor readings finally stabilized, and the numbers that scrolled across the screen made Vrail's blood run cold. The object was over 500 kilometers in length, a seamless construct that defied every principle of naval architecture known to the galaxy. It sat motionless, perfectly still relative to the station, ignoring the orbital mechanics that should have been tearing it apart. And then, as the Synod watched in frozen horror, the silence of the void was broken not by a transmission, but by a signal that bypassed their comms entirely and broadcast directly onto every screen, every datapad, every interface in the system. It was a symbol, a simple, archaic geometric design of a circle encompassing a single vertical line intersected by a horizontal arc, an ancient glyph, and beneath it a text string in a language that had not been seen in the galactic councils for 1,000 years. Vrail stared at it, his mind racing back through the archives, through the dusty data stacks of his education, until the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Humans," he breathed, the word feeling alien on his tongue. "The lost ones." The room erupted into chaos. Humans, the species that had been a minor curiosity a millennium ago, a squabbling, energetic, chaotic race from a death world in the Outer Rim who had possessed rudimentary warp drive and a penchant for aggressive diplomacy. They had been involved in minor skirmishes, traded in exotic art and strange music, and then, without warning, they had packed up their entire civilization, their fleets, their stations, their colonies, and vanished into the dark space between the galactic arms. The Great Exodus, it was called. Most historians believed they had died out, consumed by the void or destroyed by their own internal divisions. They were a footnote, a cautionary tale of a species that reached too far too fast. And yet, here was a vessel that made the mightiest flagship of the hegemony look like a primitive toy. "Prepare weapons," Morak roared, his combat protocols overriding his shock. "If it's humans, they are unpredictable. They were aggressive, volatile. If they have returned with this technology, they are here to conquer while we are weak." The general was already keying in firing solutions, his tactical interface linking with the orbital defense grid. "Target the central mass. Fire everything." "Belay that order," Vrail screamed, slamming his hand down on the console, severing the general's link. "Are you mad, Morak? Look at that ship. If they wanted us dead, we would be atoms already. They bypassed our sensors, they bypassed our shields, they are sitting inside our firing perimeter, and we didn't even know they were there until they let us see them. You do not fire a kinetic slug at a god." The tension in the room was a physical thing, a wire pulled taut to the snapping point. The alien vessel sat there, silent, ominous, indifferent to the panic it had induced. Then the communications officer spoke, her voice trembling. "Archminister, we are being hailed. Audio only. It is originating from the bridge of the vessel. The signal is clear, no static, no interference." Vrail took a deep breath, smoothing the ceremonial robes over his carapace, trying to summon the dignity of his office. "Put it through," he commanded, his voice shaking only slightly. "On the main speakers." The static hissed for a fraction of a second before a voice filled the chamber. It was not the guttural roar of a conqueror, nor the synthesized monotone of an artificial intelligence. It was a voice of profound, terrifying calm. It sounded human, male, deep, resonant, but it carried a weight, a texture of age and weariness that felt older than the station itself. "This S. Admiral Elias Vance of the United Terran Concordat, commanding the vessel's silent vigil," the voice said. The translation software struggled to convey the nuance, the sheer lack of aggression in the tone. "We have monitored your conflict for some time. We have watched the fires burn across the spiral arm. We have watched you break the gardens we once admired. We have returned not to join your war, but to end it." "End it?" Morok spat, though he spoke towards the pickup with less certainty than before. You think you can simply command the tides to stop? The Tsar will never surrender. We will never surrender. We fight for survival. There will be no surrender, the voice of Admiral Vance replied, the tone shifting slightly, becoming harder like iron cooling. Because there will be no more fighting. We have already deployed interdiction fields across the combat zones. The Tsar fleets in the Antares sector have been immobilized. Their weapons are offline. Your fleets in the Proxima Drift are similarly contained. We have dampened the fusion reactions in every warhead, scrambled the targeting computers of every kinetic battery, and neutralized the singularity drives of every capital ship currently engaged in hostilities. The war is over, General. Not because you agreed to it, but because we have removed your ability to wage it. A stunned silence washed over the Synod. It was impossible. The scale of what the human claimed, to simultaneously disable millions of tons of naval hardware across light years of space, was the stuff of fantasy. It suggested a mastery of physics that bordered on magic. You lie, whispered H.S.San, the insectoid diplomat, his antennae twitching frantically. No species possesses such reach. You are bluffing. Check your tactical nets, Vance's voice returned, patient, unbothered. You will find that your 7th Armada is currently drifting, fully life-sustained but unable to power their weapons. The Tsar High Command is receiving a similar message at this very moment. We are not asking for your permission, High Council. We are informing you of a change in management regarding the stellar neighborhood. Now I request that a delegation from the hegemony and a delegation from the Tsar join me aboard the Silent Vigil. We have much to discuss and very little time. The link cut. The view screen returned to the image of the massive ship hanging in the void like a judgment. Vrail looked at the tactical consoles. They were lit up with frantic reports from the front lines. It was true, all of it. The guns had gone cold. The engines had died. The war, the endless, grinding, apocalyptic war, had simply stopped. Not with a bang, but with a switch flicked by a ghost from the past. Vrail felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mixture of immense relief and a new, colder kind of fear. The humans were back, and they were powerful beyond comprehension. But why, and why now? The shuttle ride to the human vessel was a journey into silence. Vrail, accompanied by General Morok and Ambassador Kalith, sat in the pressurized cabin of the diplomatic transport, watching the hull of the Silent Vigil grow until it swallowed the entire view. The surface of the human ship was not smooth metal. Up close, it was a landscape of intricate fractal geometries, a shifting skin that seemed to absorb the light of the stars. As they approached the hangar bay, a cavernous opening that could have housed a city, Vrail saw no armed guards, no defensive turrets tracking their approach. The hangar was vast, clean, and bathed in a soft, natural light that felt uncannily like the sun of a garden world. When they docked and the airlock cycled, they were not met by a phalanx of power-armored soldiers. They were met by 3 figures. They were human, undeniably so, bipedal, soft-skinned, lacking natural armor or claws. But they were tall, their posture erect, their movements fluid and precise. They wore uniforms of deep midnight blue, unadorned by medals or ribbons, functional yet elegant. The central figure, an older man with hair the color of steel wool and eyes that held the depth of a nebula, stepped forward. "I am Admiral Vance," he said, offering a gesture that was neither a bow nor a salute, but a nod of recognition. "Thank you for coming." To Vrail's right, the airlock on the opposite side of the hangar cycled, and a delegation of Tsar emerged. They were a terrifying sight, towering multi-limbed arachnids encased in bioorganic combat armor, their mandibles clicking in agitation. Leading them was Warlord Zeros, a creature whose name was used to frighten hatchlings across the hegemony. Morok stiffened, his hand twitching toward the sidearm he had been allowed to keep, but Vance merely raised a hand. "Peace, General. The physics of this bay do not permit high-velocity kinetic discharges. Your weapon will not fire here." Morok tested this, discreetly flicking the safety and pulling the trigger inside his holster. Nothing happened. The mechanism simply refused to engage, as if the laws of cause and effect had been suspended locally. The general paled. "You summon us like hatchlings to a reprimand," Zyros hissed, the translator collar around his neck turning the clicks into guttural trade speech. "You disable our fleets. You violate our sovereignty. You are the lost ones. You are the cowards who fled the galaxy. By what right do you interfere in the wars of the strong?" Vance looked at the warlord, and for a moment Vrail saw a flash of profound sadness in the human's eyes. "We did not flee because we were cowards, warlord. We left because we realized that the path we were on, the path you are on now, leads only to silence. We left to find a different way. We went into the dark, where there are no stars to warm you, no resources to fight over. We learned to survive on the energy of the vacuum, to build with the dust of creation. We learned that war is not a law of nature. It is a failure of imagination. Philosophy, Morok scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual fire. You have better guns, so you preach peace. If we had your technology, we would have won this war centuries ago. Come, Vance said, ignoring the taunt. Let me show you why we returned. He turned and walked down the corridor, and the two delegations, enemies who had been slaughtering each other for generations, followed in his wake, united by confusion and a creeping sense of awe. The interior of the silent vigil was a marvel of engineering. The walls seemed to breathe, shifting opacity to reveal the inner workings of the ship, pulsing conduits of light, banks of crystalline data cores, and vast hydroponic gardens that stretched for kilometers, filled with plants from 1,000 worlds, some of which Vrail knew had been extinct for eons. We are preservers, Vance explained as they walked. When we left, we took with us the seeds of every world we could reach. We knew the galaxy was entering a cycle of contraction, of violence. We wanted to ensure that when the fires burned out, there would be something left to replant. They arrived at a central rotunda, a room dominated by a holographic display that filled the air with a rendering of the entire galaxy. It was breathtakingly detailed, showing the spiral arms, the nebulae, the black holes. But as Vrail looked closer, he saw red lines spreading like a virus across the stars, the front lines of their war. This is what you have done, Vance said, gesturing to the map. In 300 years, you have rendered 12% of the habitable systems in this sector uninhabitable. You have destabilized the gravimetric shear of the Antares Rift. You are not just killing each other. You are breaking the stage upon which you stand. It is a necessary sacrifice, Zyros argued, though he seemed mesmerized by the scale of the destruction shown on the map. The hegemony would enslave us. We fight for our freedom. And we fight for our survival against your aggression, Vrail countered, the old arguments rising to the surface. You attacked our colonies first. Stop, Vance said. The word was soft, but it carried an authority that silenced them instantly. It does not matter who started it. It matters that it ends, because while you were fighting over crumbs in the light, we were in the dark watching what approaches. He manipulated the hologram, zooming out. The galaxy shrank until it was a small disk of light in a vast, empty blackness. Then Vance pointed to the edge of the display, to the deep void beyond the galactic rim. At first, Vrail saw nothing. Then the sensors of the human ship enhanced the image. There were shadows, massive, amorphous shadows that were blotting out the light of distant galaxies. They were not ships, they were something else, clouds of entropy, swarms of silence. We call them the Null, Vance said quietly. They are not a species, they are a phenomenon, a biological and technological corrective mechanism that evolves in the intergalactic void. They are drawn to high-energy outputs. Specifically, the kind of chaotic, dirty, high-yield energy signatures produced by prolonged, inefficient interstellar warfare. The room went cold. They eat energy? Kalith asked, her voice barely a whisper. They eat order, Vance corrected. They consume complex systems, civilizations, stars. They are the great filter. We met them out there in the dark. We fought them for 500 years. We lost ships you cannot imagine. We lost millions of our kind, but we learned how to hide. We learned how to be quiet. We learned how to build technology that doesn't bleed energy into the void like a beacon. He turned to face the delegates, his expression grim. Your war. Your singularities, your antimatter bombardments, you are ringing a dinner bell that can be heard across the universe. They are coming. They are already at the edge of the galactic halo. If you continue to fight, if you continue to flare your reactors and detonate your weapons, they will be here in less than a decade, and they will consume everything. Vrail looked at the shadows on the map, then at Zyros. The warlord was trembling. The hatred that had defined his existence was suddenly rendered petty, insignificant in the face of this cosmic horror. So, you returned to save us? Vrail asked. To fight them for us? Vance shook his head slowly. No, we cannot fight them alone, and we cannot fight them for you. If we unleash our full weaponry, we simply feed them faster. We return to teach you. We return to stop the noise. The only way to survive the null is to change how you exist. To unify your grids, to dampen your emissions, to stop the chaotic release of energy that is war. We have the technology to shield your worlds, to mask your stars, but we cannot do it if you are shooting at each other. You must integrate your fleets into the Concordat's defensive lattice. You must lay down your arms and pick up tools. You must become the quiet ones. The gravity of the choice hung in the air. Surrender their sovereignty, their grudges, their history of blood, or face total annihilation by a force that did not care about politics or borders. Morok looked at his hands, the metal implants glinting in the soft light. "You ask us to trust you," the general grunted, "to trust the ghosts." "We do not ask for trust," Vance said. "We offer survival. The fleet you see outside is not an invasion force. It is an engineering corps. We are here to fix the damage you have done to space-time, to repair the rifts, to heal the worlds you burned. We can terraform your dead colonies in months, not centuries. We can provide you with power sources that do not rely on combustion or fission. We can give you a golden age, but the price is peace, immediate, total, and permanent." Zyros clicked his mandibles, a slow, thoughtful rhythm. "And if we refuse, if we choose to fight you?" Vance's expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "You saw what we did to your fleets with a command signal. If you choose to fight, we will simply turn you off. We will dismantle your war machine remotely and leave you sitting in the dark until you are ready to talk. We are not here to conquer, Warlord. We are the parents who have come home to find the children burning down the house. We are taking the matches away." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity that reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy. The Treaty of the Silent Vigil was signed not on a planet, but in the neutral ground of the human flagship. It was the strangest surrender in history because it felt like a rescue. The human engineering teams deployed immediately. Their ships, massive geometric shapes, descended over the war-torn worlds of the Antares sector. They didn't land. They hovered in the upper atmosphere, projecting fields of shimmering energy that stabilized weather patterns, scrubbed radiation from the soil, and accelerated the regrowth of biomass. Vrail watched from the observation deck of the High Synod Station as a human vessel, the Starlight Weaver, performed a gravitational suture on the instability near the Antares gate. It was like watching a surgeon stitch a wound, but the needle was a beam of coherent gravity, and the patient was the fabric of reality itself. The cultural exchange was just as jarring. Human diplomats, accompanied by sociologists and xenopsychologists, integrated into the councils of the hegemony and the czar. They didn't dictate laws, they offered optimization algorithms. They showed the czar how to synthesize their nutritional paste without strip-mining moons. They showed the hegemony how to restructure their economy away from the military-industrial complex toward research and preservation. It was infuriatingly patronizing at times, the way the humans seemed to have an answer for everything, a solution that was efficient, ethical, and logical. They were calm, always calm. They moved with the confidence of a species that had stared into the abyss and survived. But the tension remained. The revelation of the null had terrified the populations, but it had also created a strange kind of denial. Many didn't believe it. They thought it was a human trick, a story to keep them compliant. Rebels on both sides, dissident czar factions and hegemony isolationists, began to sabotage the new infrastructure. They bombed the atmospheric processors. They tried to hack the human networks. They wanted their war back. They understood war. They didn't understand the quiet. It was 3 months after the arrival that the first test came. A rogue faction of the Tsar, the Red Mandible, managed to reactivate an ancient dreadnought that had been drifting in a debris field, shielded from the initial human-dampening pulse by the sheer density of the wreckage around it. They powered up its singularity cannon and targeted a human terraforming vessel orbiting a hegemony colony world. The message was clear: we will not be silenced. Vrail was in the command center with Admiral Vance when the warning came in. "Admiral, they are targeting the Lifebringer," Vrail shouted, panic rising. "You must destroy them. If they fire that weapon, millions on the planet below will die from the backlash." Vance stood at the tactical plot, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look worried, he looked disappointed. "We will not destroy them," he said softly. "We do not kill children because they are throwing stones." "That is not a stone, that is a singularity cannon." "Watch," Vance said. On the screen, the rogue dreadnought flared with energy. The cannon glowed with the violet light of impending destruction. They fired. A pulse of distorted gravity enough to crush a moon raced toward the human ship. Vrail flinched, waiting for the explosion. But the human ship didn't move. It didn't raise shields. Instead, the hull of the Lifebringer seemed to ripple. The space around the ship folded. The singularity pulse hit the distortion field and simply curved. It didn't bounce off, it flowed around the ship like water around a stone, looping back on itself. The energy was captured, spun into a tight spiral, and then reabsorbed by the human vessel's collectors. The Lifebringer glowed brighter for a moment, its terraforming beams intensifying. "Energy is precious," Vance murmured. They offered us a gift, though they didn't mean to. Then the human ship responded, not with a weapon but with a pinpoint transporter beam. The bridge of the rogue dreadnought was suddenly empty. The crew, 300 fanatic Tsar warriors, were instantly transported into the brig of the Lifebringer. The dreadnought, now empty, powered down. "We have secured the crew," the captain of the Lifebringer reported over the comms. "No casualties. We will begin rehabilitation protocols immediately." Vrail stared at the screen, his mouth agape. You just caught the bullet," he stammered, "and you didn't even fire back." "Retaliation is a cycle," Vance said, turning to Vrail. "We are here to break cycles. Now, High Archminister, I believe we have a scheduled meeting regarding the integration of your sensor grids into the Deep Watch network. The Null are still out there, and they are getting closer." The reality of the Null became undeniable a year later. It wasn't an invasion fleet. It was a darkening of the stars in the Magellanic Cloud. The telemetry provided by the human Deep Watch network showed entire systems going dark, their energy signatures vanishing as the swarms of entropy moved through them. It was a sobering, unifying moment for the galaxy. The petty squabbles over borders and resources evaporated when the populations realized that the lights were going out in the universe. The Alliance of the Vigil was formally ratified. For the first time in galactic history, the hegemony, the Tsar, and a dozen other minor species worked as a single organism, guided by the nervous system of the human concordat. The humans shared their quiet tech. They taught the alien engineers how to build zero-point energy taps that drew power from the vacuum without creating the chaotic ripples that attracted the Null. They taught them how to cloak entire solar systems in probability fields that made them appear as empty space to outside observers. Vrail found himself working side by side with Zeros, the former warlord now acting as the head of the planetary defense grid. They stood on the bridge of the silent vigil as the first wave of the Null grazed the edge of their sector. The sensors showed a massive distortion, a cloud of nothingness that sought to consume the energy of the star system Sigma Draconis. "Grid synchronization at 99%, Zyros barked, his claws flying over the human-designed interface. "Shield harmonics locked." "Activate the shroud," Vance ordered. At the touch of a button, the entire star system of Sigma Draconis simply vanished from the sensors. To the naked eye, the stars were still there, but to the energy-hungry senses of the Null, the system had become a void. The cloud of entropy passed by, sniffing for the chaotic energy of civilization, finding nothing and drifting on into the dark. A cheer went up on the bridge, a mixture of trills, clicks, and shouts. Vrail felt a tear slide down his chitinous cheek. They had done it. They had hidden from the storm. Later that evening, Vrail found Vance in the ship's observation blister looking out at the stars. The human admiral looked tired, his age showing in the lines of his face. "We survived," Vrail said, joining him. "Thanks to you, you truly are the guardians of the galaxy." Vance smiled, a sad, weary smile. "We are not guardians, Vrail. We are refugees. We ran from the Null for centuries. We watched them eat the friends we left behind. We realized that the only way to win was to stop playing the game by the old rules." He gestured to the stars. "We are teaching you to be quiet, to be efficient, to be safe. But there is something else, something we found in the deep void that I haven't told the Council yet." Vrail felt a chill. "What is it?" "The Null, they aren't just predators," Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They are a mechanism, an immune system for the universe. They target civilizations that are growing too fast, consuming too much, endangering the fabric of reality with reckless manipulation of space-time. The wars, the singularity weapons, they damage the universe itself. The Null are the white blood cells sent to clean up the infection." Vrail stared at him, horror dawning. "We were the infection." "Yes," Vance nodded, "and so were we once before we left. We nearly destroyed our own solar system with our greed and our wars. That's when the Null first noticed us. We ran to save ourselves, but we realized that running wasn't enough. We had to change what we were." He turned to Vrail, his eyes burning with intensity. "The twist isn't that we came back to save you from the Null. The twist is that we came back to save the Null from you." I do not understand," Vrail stammered. "If the Tsar and the hegemony had continued their war," Vance explained, "you would have eventually detonated enough antimatter to rupture the local dimensional membrane. It wouldn't just have killed you, it would have unraveled this entire spiral arm. The Null would have swarmed in to cauterize the wound, wiping out everything, including the innocent developing worlds that haven't even discovered fire yet. We didn't come back just to stop you from dying." We came back to stop you from killing the future." He looked back out at the stars. Peace isn't just a moral choice, Archminister. It is a structural necessity for the survival of the cosmos. You are part of the ecosystem now. You are no longer a cancer, you are a vital organ. The war is over. The work has just begun. Vrail looked out at the galaxy, his galaxy. It looked different now. It wasn't a battlefield to be conquered. It was a garden to be tended, a fragile, beautiful thing that required silence, patience, and care. He placed his hand on the transparency next to the human's hand. "Then teach us," Vrail said softly, "teach us how to grow." "We will," Vance replied, "together." And in the silence of the void, the great ships of the human Concordat stood watch, not as conquerors, but as gardeners in a field of stars, ensuring that the flowers would bloom in the quiet, safe from the storm, protected by the wisdom of those who had walked the dark path and returned to share the light. The Galactic War was over. The age of the quiet had begun. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the universe did not scream. It breathed. Part II, the shadow of the progenitors. The peace held. For 5 years, the Treaty of the Silent Vigil was more than paper. It was a way of life. The hegemony and the Tsar, guided by the Concordat, dismantled their war fleets. The metal from the hulls of dreadnoughts was melted down to build orbital rings and atmospheric scrubbers. The orbital shipyards that once churned out missiles now produced agricultural drones and medical synths. The psychological shift was profound. A generation that had known only the fear of the siren and the flash of the bombardment now learned the rhythm of the harvest and the quiet of the library. But peace, Vrail learned, had its own complexities. As the Archminister of the newly formed Coalition of Systems, he spent his days mediating disputes over trade routes and resource allocation, battles fought with spreadsheets and debates rather than plasma lances. It was exhausting, but every time he felt the urge to scream, he looked at the reports from the Deep Watch. The Null were still out there, prowling the halo, but the sectors under the Coalition's protection remained dark to them. The Shroud technology was working. However, the humans remained an enigma. They were open with their technology, generous with their resources, but they kept secrets. The Silent Vigil remained parked at the Lagrange point of the Ethelgard system, a silent sentinel, and while human engineers were everywhere, the human military, the core of their fleet, remained hidden in the void, cloaked and waiting. It was during a routine diplomatic gala on the neutral world of Othala that the cracks in the facade began to show. Vrail was speaking with Ambassador Calith, who had aged gracefully into her role as the voice of the hegemony when Admiral Vance approached. The human looked graver than usual. "We need to talk," Vance said, dispensing with the pleasantries. "In private." They retreated to a shielded safe room. Vance activated a jamming field that hummed with a frequency that made Vrail's antennae itch. "What is it?" Vrail asked, sensing the return of the old tension. "Have the Null breached the perimeter?" "No," Vance said. "The Null are behaving as predicted. This is S. Anything else, something older." He brought up a holographic display, but instead of the galaxy, it showed a single object. It looked like a monolithic slab of black stone, drifting in deep space. It was covered in carvings that hurt Vrail's eyes to look at, non-Euclidean geometries that seemed to twist the mind. "We found this 3 days ago," Vance said. "Drifting in the debris field of the Antares sector. It was unearthed by the gravitational shifts caused by your war before we arrived. It's a beacon." "A beacon?" Calith asked. "For whom?" "Not for whom," Vance corrected. "From whom? We have analyzed the isotopic decay. This object is older than the galaxy. It predates the formation of the spiral arms. It's a relic of the progenitors." The progenitors, the mythical race that was said to have seeded life in the universe. Every species had legends of them. The Tsar called them the first hatchers. The hegemony called them the architects. The humans called them the precursors. But they were supposed to be myths, religious metaphors for the mystery of creation. "It's broadcasting," Vance continued. "A signal. It activated when the war ended, when the energy levels in the sector dropped. It seems it was waiting for the noise to stop." "What does it say?" Vrail whispered. Vance looked at them, his expression unreadable. "It's a set of coordinates and a timer. The timer is counting down. We have 48 standard hours." "Coordinates to where?" "To the center of the galaxy," Vance said. "To the supermassive black hole, Sagittarius A. There is something inside the event horizon, something the progenitors left behind. And if the signal is to be believed, it is opening." The implication was staggering. We must investigate, Vrail said, if this is progenitor technology. It could be a weapon, Vance interrupted, or a library or a trap, but we cannot ignore it. The silent vigil is breaking orbit in 1 hour. I want you to come with us. You and a representative from the Tsar. This is not a human discovery. This belongs to the galaxy. The journey to the galactic core was unlike anything Vrail had experienced. The human slipstream drive did not punch a hole in space. It slid between the layers of reality, moving the ship like a soap bubble across a pane of glass. They crossed 30,000 light-years in hours. The view from the bridge was a swirling tunnel of indigo light, hypnotic and beautiful. When they emerged, they were greeted by the most terrifying sight in the universe. Sagittarius A. The accretion disk was a maelstrom of fire, a swirling hurricane of gas and dust spinning at a fraction of the speed of light, glowing with the intensity of 1 billion suns. And in the center, the event horizon, the perfect, absolute black sphere from which nothing could escape. But there was something else. Floating just above the event horizon, in a zone where gravity should have crushed it into atoms, was a structure. It was a ring, vast beyond comprehension, encircling the black hole's equator. It pulsated with a pale, white light that seemed to ignore the physics of the singularity. Stable orbit at 3 Schwarzschild radii, the helmsman reported, his voice tight. Gravity shear is non-existent. The structure is projecting a null-gravity field of immense power. It's holding the black hole back. Hail it, Vance ordered. There was no response, but as they watched, the ring began to spin. The white light intensified, shooting a beam into the darkness of the black hole. The event horizon ripped. It didn't tear, it opened. The blackness retracted, revealing a shimmering surface underneath. A gateway. A wormhole, Calith breathed. But to where? Another galaxy. No, Vance said, staring at the readings. The energy signature, it's not spatial, it's temporal, it's a bridge through time. Before anyone could react, the silent vigil was gripped by a tractor beam of irresistible force. The ship was pulled forward, not violently, but with the inevitability of a tide. Engines offline, the helmsman shouted. We have lost control. Don't fight it, Vance said calmly. Let it take us. The ship passed through the ring and plunged into the opened singularity. The universe disappeared. There was a flash of white light, a sensation of falling, and then silence. When the view screen cleared, they were not dead. They were not in a hell dimension. They were in a star system, but the stars were wrong. They were young, blue, fierce. The nebula clouds were thick and vibrant. Astrometrics, Vance called out. Where are we? The officer at the console was pale. Sir, the star configurations, the drift, based on the expansion rate, we are in the Milky Way, but we are 7 billion years in the past. A silence deeper than the void descended on the bridge. They were at the dawn of the galaxy. Look, Vrail pointed to the main screen. Orbiting the blue star in front of them was a planet, a metallic planet, a D. Usan shell completely enclosing the star, and emerging from the shell were ships, thousands of them, organic, crystalline, beautiful ships that shimmered like diamonds. The progenitors, Vance whispered. The radio crackled. A voice, melodic and complex, speaking a mathematical language that the universal translator took several seconds to decode, filled the bridge. Welcome, children of the dust. We have been waiting for the silence. The delegation was transported to the surface of the Dyson shell. They stood in a hall made of solidified light, facing entities that defied description, beings of energy and matter, constantly shifting, radiant. We are the architects, the lead entity spoke, its voice resonating in their minds. We built the gate to bring you here when you were ready, when you had learned to stop screaming. You sent the null? Vance asked, his voice trembling slightly. We created the null, the architect replied. The garden must be weeded. Aggressive, chaotic civilizations destroy the lattice of spacetime. The null remove them before they can collapse the universe. Only those who learn the quiet, who learn to conserve, to build, to unite, can survive the filter. Only they are worthy of inheriting the mantle. The mantle, Vrail asked. The galaxy is dying, the architect said. Not now, but soon. In cosmic terms, entropy is winning. We are leaving. We are moving to a new universe, a young universe where we can begin again. We cannot take everyone. We can only take the gardeners. The entity gestured to the humans, the Tsar, the Ethel Guardians. You have passed the test. You stopped the war. You chose preservation over destruction. You chose the quiet. You are the inheritors of this galaxy. We leave you our tools, our technology, our duty. Duty, Vance asked. To watch, to guide, to tend the garden, to ensure that new life can grow without burning itself out. You are the new architects. The revelation struck Vrail with the force of a supernova. The war, the suffering, the return of the humans, the threat of the null. It was all a crucible, a test to see if they could evolve beyond the predatory stage of civilization. We accept, Vance said, standing tall. We will watch. The return trip was instantaneous. One moment they were in the ancient past, the next they were back at Sagittarius A, the ring dormant, the black hole sealed. But the silent vigil was different now. Its data banks were filled with the knowledge of the progenitors, the secrets of infinite energy, of matter creation, of life itself. When they returned to the coalition, they didn't just bring peace, they brought an era of wonder. The age of the quiet transformed into the age of ascendance. Planets were healed. Disease was eradicated. The null, no longer attracted to the quiet, efficient energy of the galaxy, faded back into the dark. Vrail stood on the balcony of his home on Ethelgard, watching the twin suns set. The sky was filled with the soft glow of the orbital rings, shimmering with the new technology. He looked at the datapad in his hand. It was a message from Admiral Vance. The humans were leaving again, not all of them, but the fleet. They were going to the Andromeda galaxy to see if there were other gardens that needed tending. We are the shepherds now, Vance had written, and the flock is vast. Vrail smiled. He looked up at the first stars appearing in the twilight. They didn't look like cold, distant fires anymore. They looked like seeds waiting to bloom. He tapped a command on his pad, dimming the city lights below, letting the natural beauty of the night take over. Quiet, he whispered to the wind, let them grow. And in the silence, the galaxy hummed a new song, a song of life, of unity, and of a future that stretched out into the infinite, guided by the children who had learned to put away their swords and touch the sky. The end of the war was not the end of the story. It was simply the end of the prologue. The real history of the galaxy had just begun, and it was written not in blood, but in light. Part III, the echo of the void. Decades passed. The coalition of systems expanded, becoming a true galactic community. The distinction between human, Tsar, and Ethelgardian began to blur as cultural cross-pollination enriched every world. But with the departure of the main human fleet to Andromeda, a vacuum of power, however benevolent, was left behind. The Council of the Vigil, now comprised of elders from all species, ruled with wisdom. But the memory of the War of the Severed Stars was fading for the new generation. It was in this era of prosperity that the anomaly occurred. Not a weapon, not a fleet, but a sound. Deep Space Outpost 4, located on the rim of the Perseus arm, picked it up first. A rhythmic signal pulsing from the intergalactic void, far beyond where the null usually roamed. It wasn't random entropy. It was structured. It was music. Vrail, now very old, his chitin gray. Ing with age was called out of retirement. He traveled to the outpost, met by the current human liaison, a young woman named Captain Alara, the granddaughter of Admiral Vance. It's coming from the Canny's major dwarf galaxy, Alara explained, showing him the waveform. It's a repeating sequence, Fibonacci, prime numbers, and harmonies. A distress call? Vrail asked, leaning on his cane. No, Alara said, her eyes shining with excitement and fear. It's an invitation. They assembled a fleet, not a fleet of war, but of exploration. The silent vigil, now a museum ship, was reactivated. Vrail insisted on coming. I want to see what lies beyond the garden, he said. The journey to the dwarf galaxy was treacherous. The space between galaxies was rough, filled with gravitational undertows and pockets of dense dark matter. But the progenitor engines held true. When they arrived, they found a system that defied logic. A binary star system, encased in a structure that made the progenitor's ring look like a toy. A crystalline sphere, light years across, enclosing both stars, and on the surface of the sphere, biological cities, not built on it but grown from it. We are being hailed, the comms officer said. The screen flickered, a face appeared. It was humanoid but translucent, its skin shifting like water. You heard the song, the being said. Its voice was a chorus of thousands. We are the coalition, Alara said, stepping forward. We come in peace. We know, the being smiled. We are the singers, we are the ones who ran before you. It was revealed that the singers were refugees from a galaxy consumed by the null eons ago. They had not fought, they had not hidden, they had transcended. They had merged their consciousness into a collective, using the power of song, pure resonant frequency, to harmonize with the null to turn the entropy into energy. The null are not enemies, the singer explained. They are the dust, we are the wind. You can hide from the dust, or you can learn to dance with it. The concept shattered the coalition's understanding of the universe again. The humans had taught them to be quiet. The progenitors had taught them to be gardeners. But the singers, they were teaching them to be artists. The universe is not a machine, the singer said. It is a symphony. Your silence saved you, but it is only the first step. To truly live, you must learn to play your part. Vrail looked at Alara. The young human captain was smiling, tears streaming down her face. She understood. The humans had always understood music. It was their oldest language. Teach us, Vrail whispered. And so the coalition began the great work. They didn't just terraform worlds, they tuned them. They built planetary engines that hummed in harmony with the stellar winds. They created a network of resonance that spanned the galaxy. When the null returned, a century later, a massive swarm drawn by the expansion of the coalition, they did not find a silent galaxy hiding in the dark. They found a galaxy that was singing. The fleets of the coalition lined up not with weapons but with emitters. They broadcast a symphony of such complexity and beauty that it resonated with the quantum structure of the null clouds. The entropy didn't consume them, it harmonized. The dark clouds turned into nebulae of light. The null were not destroyed, they were transformed. They became the medium through which the song traveled. The galaxy lit up, not with the fire of war, but with the aurora of a billion worlds singing in unison. Vrail, lying on his deathbed on Ethelgard, watched the sky. It was no longer black. It was a tapestry of shifting colors, a visual representation of the great song. He felt the vibration in his chest, a comforting, eternal rhythm. "We did it, Vance," he whispered to the ghost of his old friend. "We didn't just save the garden, we made it bloom." He closed his eyes, and the music carried him away, into the light, into the infinite, into the story that never ends. The human fleet had returned to end a war, but they had stayed to start a universe. And in the deep silence of eternity, the stars continued to sing. Epilogue, the Archivist's Log. Cycle 4000 of the Accord. Recorder, High Archivist Thel, Terran/Zar Hybrid. The archives speak of the era of fire, when our ancestors burned the dark to find their way. They speak of the era of silence, when the great fleet returned and taught us to hide. And they speak of the era of song, when we learned to speak to the void. But the story is not over. The sensors on the outer rim have picked up a new signal. It is faint, coming from the great attractor millions of light years away. It is not a song. It is a question. Is anyone there? The Council has authorized the construction of the Odyssey-class vessels. We are going to answer. We are going to the dark again, not as warriors, not as refugees, not even as singers. We go as friends. The universe is vast and it is lonely, but it isn't have to be. As long as there is one human heart, one Zar soul, one spark of consciousness willing to reach out, the darkness will never win. End log. The screen faded to black, leaving only the reflection of the viewer and the stars beyond. The story of humanity and the friends they made along the way was etched into the firmament, a testament to the power of the second chance, the strength of the quiet, and the enduring, defiant hope that when the fleet reappears it brings not death, but a new way to live. The end.